I still remember the exact moment I stumbled across the auction on eBay. It was one of those things that felt like a total steal, the kind of chance you almost don't believe is real. I've been hunting for a decent video camera for months, scanning listings, trying to find something reliable but affordable. And then this Dutch auction popped up. A high-end model way below market price, with the price ticking down every hour. It felt like someone had just miscalculated or wasn't paying attention, and I was there to snag the deal. What really sold me honestly was the seller's feedback rating. Over 100 positive reviews and almost no complaints. I spent maybe a solid half-hour reading through the comments. People raved about him being trustworthy and quick to ship. It had to be legit, right? I mean, with that many happy customers, there was no way it was a scam. At least that's what I kept telling myself. So I placed my bid. I was careful, watching the price drop slowly, trying to find that perfect sweet spot where I could win it without overpaying. When I finally won, I was buzzing. I remember thinking, okay, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to have this camera in a couple of days, and it's going to be perfect. I had already started daydreaming about all the cool footage I'd shoot, the projects I could finally take on. But then days went by without any shipping confirmation. I messaged the seller a couple of times, no response. Even stranger, the seller's profile suddenly looked different. The reviews from the last few days vanished, and the rating had dropped drastically. Confused, I started digging around online, trying to find any chatter about this seller. What I found made my stomach drop. Turns out those reviews were fake, planted by the seller himself or some accomplices. Worse, the seller only had one actual camera to sell but had 5 buyers waiting, including me. 5 buyers all promised the same item, but there was only one to go around. The seller was scammer, plain and simple. I was just one of the unlucky ones left empty-handed and out of money. That sense of betrayal? It hit deeper than I expected. At first I felt numb, then angry but mostly frustrated. I'd been so careful, so methodical, checking every little detail, yet still got fooled. I couldn't help but replay all the warnings I'd ignored and the signs I'd missed. It was like waking up from a dream to realize it had all been an illusion. But here's the thing. I didn't want to get stuck feeling defeated or just write it off as a loss. Sure, the money was gone and I wasn't getting my camera back. But something about this felt bigger, like it wasn't just about me getting scammed. This person was preying on a whole bunch of people, and they were getting away with it. That's when I decided. I had to do something more than just complain on the forum or leave a bad review. I was done being just another victim. I needed to expose this scammer for who they really were. And not just online but in their own backyard where they couldn't hide behind a screen and fake profiles. So I started digging. I used whatever clues I could find in their eBay listings, shipping addresses, usernames, anything that might lead me to their real location. As it turned out, this scammer was operating out of a small, quiet town in Texas. It was like finding the source of the problem where I could confront it head-on. At that moment it hit me. This wasn't just about getting my money back, or even just about me losing a camera. If I could rally some of the other victims and expose this scammer to their neighbors and community, maybe I could stop them from doing this to anyone else. Maybe I could turn a painfully frustrating experience into something that actually mattered. So yeah, that's when I decided to take it up a notch. To not let this scammer just disappear into the ether. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning back what you lost, it's making sure the person who wronged you can't keep getting away with it. And that's where things really started to get interesting. So after I realized I'd been scammed on eBay, losing a good chunk of money in that Dutch auction, I wasn't just gonna sit back and swallow it. Honestly, that felt like the easy way out, and I'm not the type to let someone get away with messing me over without at least trying to make some noise about it. What really got me fired up was finding out the scammer's address. Yeah, it turns out he lived in this little town in Texas, the kind of place where everyone probably knows everyone else's business. I figured if people there knew what their neighbor was up to, maybe they'd do something about it, or at the very least I could warn others not to fall for the same trick. So I started by writing a letter to the local newspaper. I poured everything into it, the way the auction was rigged, how he baited people, the exact details of what happened to me. I named names, gave dates, even included the seller's eBay username. I thought this would be straightforward. A community paper like that should be interested in protecting its own folks from scams, right? But no, the editor shot me down. They said the letter was too accusatory, and that without concrete proof beyond my word, they couldn't publish it. I wasn't gonna let that stop me. That's when I decided to get a little creative. Instead of just calling the guy out directly, I rewrote the letter to focus more on the idea of scams in general, talking about the rise of online fraud, how vulnerable people can be during auctions, and why there needed to be stronger anti-scam laws to keep these crooks in check. But here's the kicker. I cleverly worked in some details only locals would recognize. A street name, the area code, little hints that made it clear who I was really talking about, without outright accusing the paper's community of printing a hit piece. I sent it back thinking maybe they'd take the bait. And they did. They published a piece about the loopholes in the current anti-scam laws, calling for tighter regulations and better consumer protections. To most outside readers, it was just a thoughtful editorial. But here in this small town, people started connecting the dots. I began to see comments popping up on the paper's website, local Facebook groups discussing the article, and even random strangers messaging me, saying they'd heard similar stories about the same guy. It was like I had thrown a stone into a pond, and the ripples were spreading faster than I expected. Suddenly, this wasn't just my personal battle anymore. It was something the whole town was buzzing about. People who never would have thought twice about some distant online auction were now talking about the need to protect their neighbors from scams like this. And that's when things really started to. I still remember the moment I decided to take a different approach. After sending out that letter to my neighbors, which I wasn't even sure anyone would read, I was surprised by how quickly the whole town seemed to catch on. At first, I thought maybe just a handful of people would respond, but it turned out that small-town gossip was one of the most powerful tools against the scammer. Almost overnight, my mailbox filled with notes from people who had noticed strange things about the guy I called out in my letter. It wasn't just me who had been burned by him or suspicious of his behavior. One elderly couple wrote in, recalling a time when the scammer was boasting about flipping fake deals on various online platforms. Another neighbor mentioned how he was known to dodge paying back small loans or fail to deliver on community projects. It was like pulling on a thread, and suddenly this tangled mess of deceit started unraveling right before my eyes. What really surprised me was how much the letter stirred up conversation around town. At the local diner, I overheard people talking in hushed tones about the scammer's recent moves, questioning his sudden wealth and odd hours. At the grocery store, folks who usually kept to themselves were now sharing texts and screenshots of the scammer's online listings, comparing notes and warning others not to fall for his tricks. Word spread so fast that you could tell even the scammer's family knew something was up. It wasn't long before I realized that the social pressure was starting to become unbearable for him. That feeling was something I couldn't have planned for but deeply appreciated. Knowing that the burden of suspicion wasn't just on my shoulders anymore. I didn't just expose a scam. I sparked a community-wide awareness that protected others from falling into the same trap. The town's collective response acted like this invisible force, cornering the scammer with nowhere left to hide. Neighbors who I never even spoke to before came forward with stories, tips, and warnings, and suddenly I wasn't alone in this fight. I think what gave me the most satisfaction was seeing this informal form of justice in action, not something that showed up in a courtroom or a police report, but one that hit home through everyday conversations and shared vigilance. It was a reminder that sometimes, the real power isn't in recovering what's lost, but in making sure the wrongdoer no longer gets to walk around without consequence. Of course, there was no way to turn back the clock and get my money back, and I'm not going to pretend that didn't sting. But watching that scammer's reputation crumble piece by piece was a kind of victory I never expected. It was like the whole town was saying, "We see you now, and we won't let this slide." And just when I thought the story had run its course, that's when the real payoff started to take shape. After all the back and forth, the emails, the warnings, the meetings, that growing stack of evidence, it finally hit me. The money I lost wasn't coming back. I had to make peace with that. Sucked, sure. Losing a few $100 to some scammer on eBay isn't exactly a fortune, but it's the principle, right? The principle of being conned out of hard-earned cash by someone who saw an easy mark in me and probably a lot of others. For a while, I was stuck in that pit of frustration, wishing I'd never clicked bid. Wishing I'd caught on sooner. But then something shifted. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about that sneaky guy who thought he could pull one over on a whole small-town community without so much as a blink. And honestly, I realized that my real win wasn't in clawing back dollars, but in shining a spotlight on his shady operation and rallying folks around a cause greater than just one bad transaction. You wouldn't believe how people reacted once I started sharing everything: the emails, the auction history, the patterns. Folks in town, my neighbors, the local shop owners, even some people halfway across Texas started paying attention. It turned into this collective eye-opener. So many had stories of losing money or hearing whispers about that too good to be true seller, but no one had ever done anything about it. Suddenly it wasn't just me, it was us. And let me tell you, watching a whole community get riled up, protective almost, formed the kind of satisfaction that money can't buy. We even got some local media involved. A few reporters came out, eager for a story about how an everyday person took on a faceless scammer. They didn't care so much about the number of dollars lost, but more about the principle that nobody should feel helpless or embarrassed because of these deceitful tricks. The articles laid it all bare, and once the word got out, that scammer's auction started drying up. People began calling him out in online forums. His ratings plummeted. If there was any justice in the world, the scammer wasn't just losing sales. He was losing credibility, which to me felt way worse than any empty PayPal account ever would. I remember standing right outside the town diner one morning, a cup of coffee warming my hands, watching my neighbors talk about it like it was some local victory. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't the kind of thing you'd see on the evening news. No dramatic courtroom showdown or police raid, but it was real. And it was ours. The scammer's hold on the town's trust was broken not by some overnight miracle, but by steady, quiet determination and a community that refused to stay silent. That moment made me think about what revenge really means. You don't always have to strike back with harsh words or lawsuits to win. Sometimes it's about being smart, getting people together, and making sure that truth comes to light in a way the scammer can't drown out. This kind of victory lingers like a message that says, "We see you. We're not fooled." And let me tell you, in the long run, that feels just as good as any dollar amount you ever recover. So yeah, the money's gone. But the story lives on. And what started as a frustrating scam turned into something much bigger. A small Texas town standing up to dishonesty, proving that sometimes, the best revenge isn't about what you take back, but what you give forward. Next, I'll tell you why outsmarting the scammer with a little community spirit felt like the truest win of all.